One, as you can see by my mini ears, we are going to be again talking about a Disney movie, and we're going to be talking about two different versions of them, that being the original work and the Disney version. Now, you might be wondering, weren't there two movies that came out before Bambi? Because as you can see by the title, we're going to be talking about Bambi. And yes, that is true. There was Fantasia, and then there was Dumbo. The only problem is that Fantasia is not really based on a source material. It's just based upon musical composition and using animation to emphasize a certain mood or feeling of the composer's work. And doesn't really follow any clear-cut source material. It seems to just kind of do what it wants, and although there may be some things that are kind of based upon maybe a narrative, like The Sorcerer's Apprentice and things like that, I felt that for the most part, Fantasia was a work that sort of stood out on its own, and I don't feel like it should be compared and contrasted to a particular source material, because again, it's kind of a compilation of things, and doesn't really focus on a direct source material or a direct means in order to bring us further into the world of animation and into the world of Disney. So that's why I decided with Fantasia I'm not going to explore that one, because I wouldn't really have a lot to technically work with. And the same goes with Dumbo, because Dumbo is not based upon an original source material. There was no book called Dumbo. It was actually based upon somebody else's ideas that came in Walt's camp, so to speak. So I can't necessarily dive into that one in particular because it doesn't have anything. It came out of somebody's own idea. So it's not based upon an original source work, unlike a lot of the other Disney movies that we've already looked at. So that is why the next film that comes afterward is Bambi. Now, Bambi is based upon an Austrian author's work called Bambi, A Life in the Woods, or Bambi, eine Lebensgeschichte im Wald? Aus dem Wald. Excuse me. And basically that's what it means in German, if you did not catch what I was saying. And the author's name is Felix Salten. And he also did a sequel to his original work of Bambi, and it's called Bambis Kinder, eine Familie im Wald, which means Bambi's children, a family in the woods. So, for the most part, there's a direct sort of interesting fact in that that Disney also tried to do a sequel with Bambi. Now, as far as the sequel compares to the original, I'm not going to compare those two because I particularly don't care for Disney sequels. I don't think they're as good as the originals. I don't think they embody a lot of what the original work was trying to do. And for the most part, I don't think that they're considered classic, and I don't think that they are really worth looking into. So for the most part, I'm just going to talk about the original ones. So I'm not going to mention anything about the sequel. And as far as the sequel, I don't know if they actually did use that as a source reference, or if they did try to, go into that direction or not, or if they just decided, hey, we're just going to make a sequel and we're not going to even pay attention to any source material. We'll just look at what was originally in the first work, and I think that's what they actually did, because this is a sequel, and the Bambi sequel, as far as I can know from Disney, is actually a prequel. So yeah, they're not even the same thing. So there's basically no point into looking to any of these two. So we're just going to look at the original work. Now, there are some similarities here. There is this whole theme of man being a sort of a threat to forest life, a threat to the living styles, the lifestyle of the animals, in particular the deers. And this is kind of seen, how they go and, go and get the animals in a particular season because, hunters have their seasons where they go out and they hunt animals. So there's that whole emphasis on, the forest being this sort of place that is being threatened by these man hunters. And as far as the book and the movie kind of start out, it starts out similarly, with Bambi being born, the mom taking him to the thicket and teaching him things, or raising him in the thicket and then taking him to the meadow and teaching him things. That's clearly emphasized in the Disney version, and that's clearly emphasized in the original work. There's also Faline, who Bambi meets at a young age, which again is also in the Disney version. But Faline, I guess, apparently is Bambi's cousin because his aunt is named Enna. And you do see the, I don't know if the name is the same in the Disney version, but the mom of Faline is seen. But the interesting thing is Faline also has a twin brother named Gobo, and that's another character that's introduced into the original work, not incorporated into the Disney work whatsoever. Totally left out. And there's also a good separation between the females and their young, and how they're kind of a part of one another and how they take care of each other, and how that is separate from the male group. They do try to emphasize that in the book, that the males end up, sort of leaving a female to take care of the young, and the males are kind of just left out on their own, and the males take care of themselves. They don't rely on anybody else. They look to themselves, and it's really trying to incorporate that in, and that is really seen as well in the Disney version, because we do see them as sort of this force that is independent from the females and the young. Especially when they go into the meadow and then they see the male deers with the antlers coming, and then they just jump off of these rocks in the Disney version, and it really tries to emphasize this kind of grandness and superiority that they have as far as forest life is concerned. It's also emphasized with the fighting, which again is also in the Disney version, but it's done in a little bit of a different way, unlike the original one, which I will get into. And for the most part, Faline plays the same role. She plays the role as the one who Bambi falls in love with and Bambi cares about and supports, and eventually ends up having her kids. I mean, at least it's hinted at in the original work, but it's clearly there in the Disney version. And then the old prince, which we later figure out is Bambi's father, but it's more emphasized in the beginning in the Disney version that this is Bambi's father, but in the book it doesn't really talk about that until the end. And then the father's kind of like, surprise, yeah, I'm your dad, really, just so you know. And again, we get the two twins that were born at the end, and that's a similar thing in the original. There's two twins that are born there, and they do end in sort of like this separation, that the Bambi's left on his own, and the two twins and the mom are together. And it's not until that the males get into a certain age where they kind of transition into the sort of male role that they play. So a lot of roles are emphasized in this book as well as in the film. They try to make it so that the males do have this kind of collective independence, and in that they sort of embody that spirit. And when their male counterparts, or like their male sons, grow up, they will take on that role to teach them how to be independent. And that's sort of seen in the book as well as in the movie to a certain extent, with Bambi being helped out by his father at certain points. So that's clearly there. And the thing is that it's interesting because it seems like Bambi gets a little bit more independent in the book at first. In the Disney version, Bambi is really close to his mom. They truly try to establish the closeness that they have for each other. And they really try to make it so that they're that when Bambi's mom eventually is no longer part of Bambi's life, that it really impacts us as an audience. And that's why a lot of people just found the whole scene of Bambi running and then his mom telling him to run, and they both running in the meadow and or from the meadow and trying to get into the thicket. You really do get the sense of, tension. And, once Bambi's mom dies, it's very devastating to us as an audience. Very devastating to us as kids, because we really look to our moms for help and for guidance. But it seems like that Bambi's mom was, okay in the book with leaving Bambi alone at times. But in the Disney version, she literally does not want him going out in the meadow on his own. When at one point when she introduces him into the meadow, she's like, "Don't you dare, run out there without me." So that's clearly there. What's also different is that in the Disney version, we don't ever see man. We never do. Man is not. It's there, but it's never shown. We don't see a hunter. We don't see any sense of somebody, coming up behind Bambi or his mom or anybody else. We never see man. We only hear the gunshots in the movie. In the book, Bambi does see man. It's clear that man is presented to Bambi. Bambi knows what man is and everything, but it seems like in the Disney version they sort of cloud that fact. They kind of don't seem to exactly know who man is. It seems like a lot of the forest characters don't know anything really about man. All they hear is a gunshot. They don't see anything. But in the original work, it's clearly shown that Bambi does see a person, trying to shoot him. And so that's why he runs. And then, there's also the male counterparts kind of, a particular stage tells him later on in stages, like the male deer basically tells him, that you shouldn't, be afraid, and you shouldn't rely on your mom and stuff like that. Yeah, that's kind of how it kind of works in the Disney version. But it's all done with this old prince character who happens to be Bambi's father, and we'll get into that a bit. But for the most part, it seems like in the original work, they try to, emphasize the fact that, you should, grow up and learn to be independent. And I think the Disney version tries to encompass that as well, but tries to leave us with a sort of an attachment to childhood and to a sense of, wanting to be with our mom or whoever we find to be a sort of protector for us, who cares about us. There's also other characters in the novel that are not in the Disney version at all, like Marina is a young doe, Netala, an older doe, and then Rano and Kraus, who are two princes. And the thing is that when Bambi is left in the meadow on his own and he encounters this this hunter, his mom isn't killed. Like, the only time in the Disney version we see Bambi really technically directly fleeing from man in an open meadow is with his mom. And as a result, in the Disney version, his mom ends up being killed in the process. But that's not how she ends up being killed in the original novel. In the original novel, she just gets killed by some mid-winter hunters. And it doesn't really go into this profound moment of, Bambi's mom being killed, because, again, Bambi's mom was kind of leaving him on his own a little bit more. So there's not really a collective attachment so much as is emphasized in the Disney version. The Disney version really tries to emphasize the difficulty in having to let somebody that we dearly love go. In the book, it kind of just says, yeah, well, that's life, deal with it. And doesn't really give us an emotional impact on that front. And then also the other character that I mentioned that's in the original book, but that's not in the movie, is Gobo, who's Feline's twin brother, and he goes missing while this winter hunt is going on. And once Bambi's mom is found to be dead, Bambi is taken in by Netala. There's some fighting that occurs between him and the other males, and he defeats them to show his superiority. It's sort of similar in the Disney version, except it's only one male, and he's kind of putting the territory mark on Feline, and Bambi obviously doesn't like that, so he takes his initiative. In this, it doesn't really emphasize that. It kind of just suggests that, yeah, it's just male counterparts fighting against each other just to show superiority. And then there's also, even though Bambi knows that there is this hunt going on, he gets fooled too by hearing a doe call, and then the old prince, who happens to be Bambi's father, tells him, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't go after those calls because those are false calls, and then he tries to really bring down the point, like, you can't fall for this stuff, and he kind of teaches Bambi later on about, how you should protect yourself against this being called man. And then Gobo ends up being found, and he basically says, oh, a guy took care of me, a man took care of me, a human being took care of me. And so he kind of, as a character, is more accepting of man because of that, because man saved him. And then Marina, who's the other character that's not in the Disney version, becomes his mate. And then he's killed by a hunter because he believes that a halter would protect him against man for some reason. And obviously that goes against him. And it shows like how that experience of seeing man as not like this evil thing has changed his opinion, and then in the end changes him for the worse, and probably results in him getting killed, which is unfortunate. but that's kind of not really emphasized in the Disney version. We never see a character encounter man. It seems like man's just kind of this mysterious being. With different things, how to avoid man reveals that, and as it goes on, we obviously see that, you know, the old prince, who ends up being Bambi's father, you know, teaches him, like, you know, how to avoid the trickeries of man, and then he reveals that he's his father later on, and then he eventually dies. In the Disney version, he doesn't really die. He just kind of, you know, goes, okay, you're independent now, you know, my work here is done. As you kind of can see at the end, it's kind of like Bambi sort of taking his place, but he doesn't necessarily die. And then basically, as he's leaving, it shows, you know, how Bambi's become an adult now, and he's able to live on his own and things like that. And that's clearly emphasized in both versions. So for the most part, the characters in the original work are all does and deer. They're not there's no thumper, there's no owl, there's no other animals. It's all deers. Deer. I always keep getting deer and deers mixed up. There's no S at the end. But the point being is that there is no other animals. You really don't get what other animals are feeling, or if there is any other animals, which, I mean, I assume that there would be. I mean, I don't think there's just deer in a forest. I mean, I don't think that's possible. And it kind of emphasizes the forest as a community, with all these different animals and how they all work together, and go through certain different things, in life. And here it just kind of focuses more on the deer and how the deer life is structured, and they don't really focus on any other animals at all. None of the other animals are really characters to say, that could be spoken of, because they're not there. As far as the message, it's obviously there. We'll obviously get that it's there in both versions. You know, the whole fact of growing up and being independent. The Disney version does it in I think a more subtle way, and the book kind of does it in a more straightforward, kind of almost crueler way. It seems like that Bambi didn't really have an actual attachment to his mom. It doesn't seem like that it was about having attachments. It was almost about like breaking away from attachments and just learning to be on your own and just not relying on anybody or anything or anybody else. And how you can get to that point by relying on other people. So it does that in the Disney version, but I don't think it does it it does it sometimes maybe in a harsh way, but I don't think it overpowers it so much as it does in the book, where the book just kind of lays out for you, yeah, deal with it, you know, and doesn't really have any emotional attachments, and doesn't really show the difficulty of this whole transitioning of relying on people to being independent. In the Disney version, it's clearly there that Bambi struggles with that, and his dad is almost kind of, he is kind of cruel to him. It's not really emphasized so much in the story because, again, the dad isn't really there when his mother dies, but in the Disney version, like, literally when Bambi comes out of the thicket and asks for his mom, he's like, your mother can't be with you anymore, and he just says it in this, like, you know, such a harsh tone, and in a very kind of unemotional tone, that it kind of is hard for even for people like me to say, like, what kind of a father are you, telling your kid, yeah, your mom just died, too bad, deal with it, I mean, it's just kind of, the Disney version tries to display sort of that harsh, cruel reality, but I don't think it overpowers it so much as it does in the book. Because in the book you have people like, Gabo, who ends up getting killed, and he even was the only one to maybe realize that, really man is not really maybe the enemy, really. Even though the book kind of comes away with that fact that man is, this evil thing. But again, in the Disney version, it's clear that man is the sort of villain. But the thing is you never see him. You never see that whole emphasis of man being evil, because you don't see the person. You don't see who man is. Man is mysterious, and I think that's a really good way of putting it, because if you don't really show really what man is, man can be anything. And the whole thing with the Disney version is that it has a different kind of real actual climax. In the book, it doesn't seem to have a climax. It just kind of things happen, things move forward, and then you just go eventually to the end. But in the Disney version, it has this climax with, like, the forest being burnt down, and how the animals kind of go about and how they deal with this, and how they just run over to an area where there's sanctuary. And this is clearly emphasized, and Bambi and his dad, they take care of each other and support each other throughout this whole kind of process. So yeah, for the most part, I think that's really all I can say about these two works. I think they're both interesting. I kind of like the idea of certain characters in the original work, like Gabo. But I also like me some Thumper, too. So, for the most part, even though they do focus on different things, and they do have way different characters for the most part, they do try to emphasize sort of that same environmentalistic thing that Bambi was going for. The animation in the Disney film really does try to emphasize nature and the beauty of nature, and how the fire literally consumes and destroys it. And in the book, it really tries to emphasize how people mistake things and how it ends up costing them, like Gabo. And I think it tries to do that maybe in the Disney version as well. There's one scene where there's a quail, and I think it's a quail. It's a kind of bird, and she's really scared, and she's afraid, and she wants to escape because she's afraid that man's going to find her, and she says, we should fly, so we can get away. And then the others are like, no, you shouldn't do that, because, man's going to see you, man's going to shoot you. And she's just too scared of being caught that she goes out, and when she goes out and flies into the air, that's what ends up killing her. Similar with Gabo thinking that, every man is going to be nice now. Every man is going to be, this perfect angel who's going to, spare him. It kind of plays into the forest characters' naivety of how they see things that are unknown to them or are on the outside world. And, it's kind of warning you of the dangers of strangers, of things that you don't know, because these things can really have an impact upon your life and maybe actually cost you your life. And I think that was really good, and that's what, for the most part, that's what I got out of Bambi when I watched it, and this is what I got out of when I really read this book. So clearly both versions do have a message, and they do try to enforce that message, and it's the same thing with Pinocchio, again, enforcing that message. And I think it's similar with Snow White in a sense that even though Snow White doesn't really have so many clear messages, it still tries to emphasize that whole point of, karma. So for the most part, what I can say is that both versions I think are worth looking into. I'll make sure to put a link below. I actually wasn't able to read the whole novel of Bambi. They did not have any available source online, but I was able to find a Wikipedia search and basically tell you all the things that I've already told you. But for the most part, it still has some other information in there in case you're interested about knowing some other things about Bambi, or if you want to know about the sequel, because you can just click on the sequel title, and then it should take you to the Wikipedia page about the sequel. So, if you're interested in that, feel free to look that up. But yeah, I think that's really all I can say, and I'll make sure to put the Disney movie up as well, which I think for the animation is just stellar. I think Disney did a really good job of emphasizing the animation. And as far as the way the story is structured, I mean, I'm not sure how the writing works because, again, I just read the synopsis. But from what I can tell is probably that it was written well, and probably tries to emphasize the imagery through the words. But as you can see by Disney, they just do a fantastic job with emphasizing it through their animation, and you will see how it just looks like you actually are in nature. And the artwork is just fantastic. Disney, I think, did a really good job. Having that being said, though, it does have some differences. There are things that are there in the original work that are not there in the Disney work. There's really nothing cutesy. There's a lot of cutesiness in the Disney version. There's nothing really cutesy about the original tale. The original tale is just full-blown dark. And I think that's what Disney movies try to do. They try to balance out that dark-esque aspect and then provide some lightheartedness to it. That's why I think this movie in particular stands out, and why the older movies like Pinocchio and Snow White are so praised so highly, is because they know how to balance that dark tone with the light tone. There's actually some dark moments in Bambi. It's not all just light and fluff. There are some points where he is fighting a buck. There are some points where there's a forest fire and there's these animals trying to escape it. There are some dark aspects to it, so to say that it's 100% light fluffy is just not true, because there are also some dark tones to it. And some awkward tones with it, with like Bambi and his dad. So for the most part, I can say that they're both worth looking into and both investing your time into if you're interested. If you particularly like Bambi, this is definitely something worth looking into. So that's really all I can say about these two versions. But if you have any questions, comments, concerns, I'm more than happy to answer them. And until next time, bye-bye.